I now request Ms. Rajgopal to deliver the valedictory address.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to Mr. Lakshmi Narayanan, Mr. Gopal, and all other committee members and the convention chairman of this wonderful conference. I thank you all for the privilege of being here today and being a part of such a wonderful an event which has been constructed around such a powerful theme of I Can Do It. To me, it sounds like an anthem. It has the potential of becoming an anthem of a young nation such as ours, and has the potential to perhaps charge every individual who is here today and was part of the wonderful deliberations. I heard today's sessions. Each one of them was simply fantastic in terms of the content, in terms of the value, in terms of the global perspectives you got. And this theme ringing in the background of I Can Do It certainly would have set the perfect stage for this convention today. I'm very excited to be here, and I felt an immediate connect with all of you entrepreneurs as I walked in this evening, because I felt that this is a flock I belong to, a flock of entrepreneurs. And that's an excitement, that's a chemistry you feel when you see a lot of other people who perhaps are going to engage in the same journey that I have been engaged in for several decades now. So while I admit to being excited to being here, I also confess to being a little intimidated. One, I know that it is the end of a long day, and a valediction is never too easy. I believe you've heard powerful stories from powerful people, and I will do my best to keep you engaged. And in that sense, it is daunting. And I have felt concerns of how I'm going to live up to this honor bestowed upon me has been tugging at me today. But somehow the theme of your conference does not allow me the luxury of that. And as a consequence, those of you who are sitting here are a hostage to me for the next 25 odd minutes. So this exhortation of I can do it, from man to man or from one man to another, is a beat of the mind to which man has marched to the drums of his own persuasion for as long as man has existed on this planet. For as long as man has pursued either war or peace, he has pursued riches or love, knowledge, academic or spiritual, he has always and inexorably marched to this beat of I can do it. It is perhaps a song of self-belief which plays itself out, whispering a silken message to you all the time, that if you have any chance of making it with absolute conviction, the goals that you seek, and the goals that you strive to attain, then this beat of your mind that you can do it has to remain alive and has to keep beating always in the background. Every one of us is born with this beat of the mind, just as you're born with the beat of a heart. And what I've realized is that if the beat of the heart stops, you die. But if the beat of this mind stops, you are defeated in purpose. And that is another kind of death, perhaps one which is worse in many ways. I am therefore hugely persuaded that the belief that one has in oneself to achieve the goals that you set out to lies embedded at the very heart of every human endeavor. And I will strive to, as I narrate, try and weave some parts of my own story into this narrative as we go along, and perhaps will help make clear what I'm alluding to as a song of self-belief, which is scripted as I can do it. The self-belief, so it is a time, I'll take you back to why courage and conviction are perhaps the most important ingredient for an entrepreneur if he is to embark on a journey with the belief that I can do it. So I was a civil servant in the Indian Police Service, was born into a middle-class family. I was lettered but not educated in business, and served 10 years in rough frontier towns called Unnao, Fatehgarh, Kanpur, in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And I mention this because I'm sure you will all agree that it is not exactly an ideal preparation for someone who is going to plunge headlong into entrepreneurship. However, 10 years into that journey, I realized I was no longer in love with my job, and so I resigned. And the reason I mention the aspect of my resignation from the Indian Police Service was because of what it took at that time. I resigned in the face of enormous counsel of friends and family saying that I should not. I mean, and they were very much more graphic in their argument as to why I should not resign. In fact, my boss at that time made the most irregular suggestion that I actually go on medical leave, saying that I would need a fallback option. What he perhaps was doing was predicting a very quick failure and knew that I needed a place to go back to. So it was all of that, but I somehow felt differently even at that moment. I knew and felt that in an ancient military sense of the phrase, burning your bridges, I somehow felt that I had to burn my bridges if I had to give this endeavor everything that I had. I knew that if I had a fallback option, and the Indian Police Service is not a bad fallback option, and that would come to represent the sum of my insecurities, and which would in some way keep eating into the courage, the conviction, the resolve, the fortitude, which I'm sure was of absolute vital, a necessity if this courage and conviction was to have any chance, any hope of reaching the shores that it intended to reach. And that's why I highlight that moment of my resignation, is that if you're an entrepreneur and you have to make that choice, make a choice which is complete, because you have to believe that I can do it. If you don't believe that you can do it, and you keep fallbacks, if you hold something back, it is my belief that you will not be giving the success that you deserve every opportunity that it needs. So I choose my words with care here, because I am not saying that courage and conviction is guaranteeing you any success. All I am saying is that it will put you on a road where you will deserve the success that you may meet. And that's why it is of such massive significance. So as I moved on I resigned and moved on to into a new planet virtually. I had to relearn life, is when I realized that you have to be an optimist. Optimism is absolutely the second most important pillar on which the I can do it rhythm of life can whisper that secret to you all the time. Because what does it mean when you move into a world which you're not sure of? You're moving into being an entrepreneur, you're in this uncharted territory. If you're not an optimist, then you will not take any risks. It is that ability to take that risk and the ability to take that risk with a sense of optimism which will push you past that first barrier to being an entrepreneur. So for those of us who do get past, you come to that fork in the road where one says, move on peacefully, this is the world you know. And the other is that fork where there is a warning sign which talks to you about all your inner fears, which tells you about all the things that could go wrong, and for all the reasons that you could fail. So you're at that fork of that road, and you have to take, and I'm presuming that if you're an entrepreneur, you want to go down the other road. So what happened to me was I reached that fork too. I knew that I wanted to start an apparel company. I had visited a factory of a friend of mine, and I was somehow taken in by the frenetic pace and activity of a garment factory, the hundreds of people working there. And somehow it reached out to me. The spirit of that place reached out to me, beckoning to me, saying, walk down this path. Since I knew no other business, I had no other skills, so I chose to follow it. And then I came to that fork in the road. And there was this massive signboard there, massive, bigger than any other signboard, white background, every lettering in red, skulls and bones everywhere. And it seemed to flash at me saying, you do not belong to this road. You are a police officer. You have no skill sets to run a business. You know nothing about stitching a garment. You are married. You have 2 children. You are responsible for their future. You are putting their future at risk. You are a man who's condemned to extinction the minute you step on this road, was what the sign was telling me. Now, if I was not an optimist, and if that optimism was not there to quell the fear and allow this beat of my heart, the beat of my mind to say that yes, I could do it, and that I could disregard every one of those warnings, every one which seemed so true to me. And that's what an entrepreneur has to do. What is apparent, the reasons why you should not follow through, is what counsel you will get. If you try to build a consensus amongst your friends and advisors, any management association, anywhere you go for counsel, a person with skill sets of the kind I had, and perhaps some of you will have in terms of your lack of preparedness to walk down that path, you're not going to see much support. What was amazing was I did not see a single caveat in that board which said, perhaps you could squeeze through. No, the door was shut. So that optimism at that moment, perhaps is what, is the other face of being rash. However, it helped me quell my fears at that moment, and I moved forward down that path of being an entrepreneur. So what happens beyond that? And that's a curious moment in your life. I mean, you've held your courage and conviction, you've moved, you were an optimist. That first 1 year, and I'm sure this holds good for any young entrepreneur who's going to walk down such a path, that first 1 year or a period thereabouts is about the most dangerous. Is when that beat of your mind which says you can do it is at its most vulnerable. It is a flame which is flickering to extinction. And with each passing day, every warning that you read about when you went on that fork of the road seems to be speaking to you with greater clamor, saying, I told you so. And it is, and that's human nature. When, as you face more adversity, your footsteps lose their energy, you seem to get a little unfocused, you're no longer sure of yourself. It is then that beat of your mind which says, I can do it, I can do it. It has got to keep whispering its elegant message to you all the time. If you lose sight of that beat, throwing in the towel is an easy option. And if I had that fallback option, my friends, I am not so sure that I would have kept walking down that path. So what happened to me was, in my case, that flame which was beating nearly died. And it died on a brutally cold, wintry evening in Moscow. And this is what happened. So when I was reached the end of the road, as far as I had no more money left. The business was going nowhere. It was a tiny apparel factory. And the plans I had made when I resigned and what transpired in reality were completely different. But I managed to secure an invitation to a fair in Moscow held by a Russian government company called Razno Expo. So with the last of the money I had, and perhaps with the last flicker of hope, I gathered my samples and flew to Moscow, and that was the first time I'd ever been overseas in my life. went to Moscow and you can imagine, winter time in Moscow, it was brutal. And when I show up at the hotel, which was the convention center, I realized there was a very powerful cartel of Indian exporters who had never allowed the entry of a new supplier into Russia for many years. And I was just a pesky, up-and-coming, wannabe exporter. I mean, so they had completely blocked off my entry. When I went to the convention desk, they looked up the list and said there was no invitation extended to a company with mine, which bore my name. And when they didn't find the name, they said there is no accommodation for me, no place to display my merchandise. And this was about rock bottom as it got. The fair was for 5 days. I spent 3 of those 5 days going and talking to anyone who looked like a Russian in authority, pleading my case, trying to convince them of my dire condition. But it just wouldn't happen. And that was perhaps the moment when I was on the mat when that flame would have extinguished. And why you need to have a never say die attitude as an entrepreneur was, I woke up on the 4th morning and decided I need to do something radically different if I was to survive, and I marched to the Indian embassy. I went to the Indian embassy and sought an audience with the Indian ambassador, who actually was designated as the Indian ambassador plenipotentiary to the USSR. I mean, he was a very senior man, Ambassador Call. And I must say, I used a little sleight of hand there. I used the fact that I was a civil servant to seek the audience, because there was no way he would have let me into his chamber if I hadn't said that. But when I entered his room and he looked at me, and I was rather unkempt with 3 days spending in the lobby of a hotel, and when I mentioned the reason for my being there, he was initially very affronted. He was very upset. But I begged him for his patience and somehow got my story out. And somehow the penny dropped in his mind, and somehow he believed that he needed to help an Indian citizen, and that's why he was an ambassador for. I think I had actually had the courage to tell him that, Your Excellency, you are the ambassador, you are to protect my rights. I am being discriminated against. And I said whatever I had to say. The penny dropped, and that man turned my life around. What he did is a story for another time, but the reason I bring it here in this narrative is there comes that make or break moment. There comes the time when you are absolutely convinced that there is no going forward. You believe that in the normal course of the manner in which you seek to achieve, to seek to strive, there are certain doors you're aware of, and there are certain doors you're not aware of. If you're an entrepreneur and you are going to go down this path, and if you're going to hold this "I can do it" beat whispering in your mind, then you have to knock at every door, seen or unseen. You have to keep thrashing arms, legs, your body, your mind. You flail and you flail and you flail. I guarantee you, you will find a way out. If you stop short of that last breath, it's possible that the flame will die. And that flame of "I can do it" once is dead, and then the purpose is defeated. So that's the moment which you need to be prepared for, and when you push past that, I can guarantee any young entrepreneur here who is on that journey or is wanting to go down the journey, that you will find more and more ways to succeed. And therefore, to move ahead with this narrative, the enterprise took off. But I was not to know that it would be a very short-lived flight for that enterprise, because the Soviet Union met its demise a year after I got my first business from them, and the flight landed. But what it did for me, and that's all that you need, if you're as desperate as I was, is that little window of opportunity. That 1 year allowed me to learn the business. I transitioned from being a civil servant to being a businessman, or a small businessman. I learned the essential craft of my trade. I learned to sell my expertise to a few Western customers who found reason to give me some business. So I had enough fuel to take off again. So I'm going to continue using this analogy of an aircraft and runway, because I don't want to bring in jargon here at this point. The aircraft is going to be my enterprise, and perhaps the runway is going to be the organization. So, because ever since my flight took off, I have never cruised consistently. I have always taken off, wobbled, had to land again. But what I did do in the intermittent time between every wobble, landing, and takeoff was to build a runway of skill sets, which would allow my flight to perhaps a controlled touchdown rather than a crash, land, and burn. And that's what is, I think, the most important lesson for any entrepreneur who is so caught up in the everyday task of surviving that he somehow forgets to put in place what it takes for an organization to survive. And I don't need to repeat what you need to do for an organization to survive. I'm sure each one of you reads a chapter and verse. You've been told again and again what to do to survive. What should a company do to survive? That runway, if it is constantly put in place, and if that represents the health of your organization, it will provide the strength for this aircraft to keep landing. I wish aircrafts of yours just take off and keep cruising and go from one altitude to the other and ultimately land in the destination it intends to reach. Mine was never such an aircraft. I never ever reached my destination in one hop. It has been a very stomach-churning flight for those who've been with me on this journey. But the organization has managed to, at elevated levels, keep creating these runways where the aircraft of my enterprise kept landing and kept taking off. So from there on, it is a story of why this runway, why the entrepreneur needs to think about an organization in times of peace and not in times of war, as they say. An army never prepares for war in times of war. You have to prepare in times of peace. And that's what every entrepreneur has to learn to do. When good times, when there are prosperous times, you neglect to think about what you have to do to put in as a response mechanism to what lies just beyond what you can see. So as we went along, we went along, the business grew. I raised private equity from several companies. We put in plans to take our company public. We had a dream to launch a domestic brand called Indian Terrain. We launched the brand. We were accelerating on that path, on that highway, on that air corridor. This flight was perhaps threatening to catch a momentum when life happened to me. Those of you who heard John Lennon's famous song, the lyrics go, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. And life happened to me, and it was again, and I share this only to talk about the resilience required. My wife, my daughter, and a young colleague of mine who was running the young brand, all three of them met with a horrific road accident. And in one moment, perhaps the management team of that company collapsed. I had to take my daughter and go to the US to bring her back to life. My wife was in hospital, the Indian Terrain lost its leader, and most of all, the morale of my company just sank to its knees. They couldn't comprehend that an entrepreneur, and that's what I'm trying to say, is that if you want to go down this journey successfully, it's not only about being prepared to face life as a businessman. It's not about what business is going to throw you away. It is about what life is going to throw you away. None of us can ever find that insulation and hope. And when something happens to you which is outside your business, you can't go back to your office and say, I had this tragedy at home, so I can't really attend this MIS. This is what happened to me at home, and I can't do this. You just do not have that luxury. That silken beat has to keep reminding you, I can do this. I can do this in the face of any adversity, anything which life throws at me. If this is my journey as an entrepreneur, then whatever it is that comes my way, I have an answer for it. And the only answer you have for it is the spirit, is the strength of your spirit, the strength of your response, your ability to take off again. But we went ahead with our business plans. We took our company public, we raised money, we made a massive acquisition, we grew. But perhaps once again, the fact that I was distracted, the fact that the morale of my company was low, as I had mentioned. Maybe our management bandwidth had shrunk in its mental size. For once, I did not have the space to keep laying that runway which was so necessary for an organization which had overnight grown to a fairly large size. We had more than 14,000 employees at that time. So we hit another air pocket. But this time it was even more intense because I was distracted as an individual. And that is the reason I bring to talk about this incident, is that if you're an entrepreneur, you have to learn to endure that pain of the journey. That pain could last a day, it could last a year, it could last 5 years, it could last 10 years. But you have to bear in mind, if that is beating in the background, that you can do it, that pain will one day go away. It will one day go away and will be replaced with something else. But you have to stay that course, irrespective of the nature of the pain that you endure. And that is a given for any entrepreneur who wants to set out on a journey of enterprise. 5 years into that pain, yes, the runway got built, the aircraft landed once again, and it took off once again, perhaps with more vigor. And today, as I see it, the brand Indian Terrain is well established in this country and poised to grow. Our manufacturing operation is robust. It's perhaps such a critical part of our supply chain to build the brand. I have top-class leadership in the company. Many of them have grayed prematurely, and I accept blame for that. But they have emerged as such wonderful leaders, and they lead with the same rhythm of the beat that I perhaps started off this journey with, that they can do it. So we have built that leadership, we have built the team, we have built another runway of skill sets, which now will take this flight to its next destination. So what do I see now? Do I see, the courage and conviction and the optimism and all those attributes which I think an entrepreneur needs to have, which is so essential, has brought you to a point? Do I see that this aircraft of my enterprise is going to cruise? Certainly not. I'm willing to bet the experience of my lifetime that there is a wobble ahead waiting to overtake us somewhere. But the fact is that we are so much, like any entrepreneur, we are wonderfully well prepared to take on what lies in store. I'm no longer the rookie I was a couple of decades ago. I know what it is to face this. And that is the expertise that every entrepreneur needs to build along with him and his team along in the journey. So as I wind this narrative down, telling you about why the I can do it, at least in my life, has been so relevant, has been of such extraordinary significance. Because if I had allowed this beat to die down at any moment over the last 2 decades, I'm not sure that I would have reached a place of some satisfaction in my journey as an entrepreneur. I know the organization is not a poster child of a successful enterprise, of the most successful enterprise. But it certainly can stand up for one which has displayed true grit, which has developed great values, great resilience, the ability to stay the course, to withstand a journey which has been hard and tough, and which in every manner has thrown every adversity that any entrepreneurial journey can have. And that I am extremely proud to have walked that path. I have absolutely no regrets about that decision I made more than two decades ago to burn the bridges. Absolutely no regrets about the choices I made, about the courage or the conviction or whatever it was that propelled me down this path, which magnified the scale of my dreams, the strength of my dreams and my ambitions, and has brought me to a place where I can say it was a journey which was well journeyed. So to all of you who are going to set down this path, I can tell you with the utmost guarantee that it is all finally down to the man. It is down to your will, it is down to your spirit, it is down to the I can do it attitude. And having been there myself, let me tell you with absolute conviction that each one of you can do it. Each one of you can reach the destination you seek But forever remember this one counsel I give you, that the silken whisper of the I can do it song of self-belief should forever keep playing out in the background of your lives. Wish you all the very best, and thank you all once again for staying back to listen to me.